Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? We're getting started a little late, but it'd be great if you could find your seats for the last few minutes of the membership plenary. Sorry, I failed to reintroduce myself at the last little segment. I'm Stephen Best, professor here at Berkeley and president of CHCI. So for our final section of the membership plenary, we thought it would be valuable in a rather tumultuous and stressful year to ask three of our members to reflect on a prompt. I'll read the prompt to you. The prompt that we shared with today's panel was this: how have the events of the last 12 months on and off campuses affected the way your center organization operates and the work you do as director or administrator? We invite you to share your experiences of the last few months as center directors or administrators regarding the topics that have dominated an eventful academic year: the public perception of higher education, the evolving role of universities, academic freedom, diversity, equity, and inclusion, the right to assembly, and campus politics. We've asked Amanda Anderson from Brown, Joe Fox from the University of London, and Pat Parker from UNC Chapel Hill to sort of speak for about 5 minutes each in response to that prompt. And then for the remainder of the panel, we are just going to open up the conversation to you to sort of hear your input on how the last year has been for you at your center and in the kind of directing of your center. So I don't know if we have an order. Have we? Okay. Oh, the order. Okay. From left from right to left. So Pat will speak first, then Amanda, and then Joe, and then I'll come back to moderate the Q&A. Thanks.
Thank you, Stephen. Again, I'm Pat Parker. I'm the director of the Institute for the Arts and Humanities at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I now understand that we are indeed being recorded, so that may change a few things. But I'm also a professor in communication studies. I have been at UNC Chapel Hill since 1998, so I've been around campus for a while. I served as a department chair of communication studies for 6 years prior to becoming director. And I want to give you that context as well as, excuse me, I'm just, sorry. Okay, I feel like we should keep time. And I had, excuse me, just 1 second. I'll just give myself a little timer here. I want to give you some context about our center in terms of how we're situated politically, I guess, institutionally and politically on campus, because I think that matters in terms of the prompt, how our center has been impacted and what the expectations were over the last 12 months. As I already mentioned in the previous session, we're in the College of Arts and Sciences. We have 9 staff members, and my colleague, the executive director of the Institute is here, Tommy Watson. So glad that you are here. So we have 9 staff, 2 faculty advisory boards, and a 24-member external advisory board made up of alumni, including former members of the Board of Trustees. We have had members of our board who had served on the university's, finance committee. So really, powerful players, I guess, as external advisory boards go. So politically, that gives us a measure of power, given the state politics. If you've been following the politics in North Carolina, we are now officially a battleground state, and we have a very conservative, Republican-led state legislature, including the Speaker of the House, and then we have a Democratic governor from the Democratic Party, but very sort of dicey political situation right now. But for our center, we have a measure of power, especially relative to some centers, other centers on campus. And that means that we have some autonomy in our programming, and also because of my time on campus, I have built up a reputation, and we have this positive reputation, a lot of positive equity. Yeah, none of that matters really, because things are so fraught. So let me just give you a glimpse of the past 12 months. In August, our school year began with a campus shooting. One of our colleagues was murdered by a graduate student, and we experienced a lockdown, just a very tragic situation. And so that was in August, and then October 7th happened with the Hamas attack in Israel, another tragedy. In January, we saw the resignation of our chancellor, who is now at Michigan State. And then he was replaced by a political, and this resignation was not, there are more details I could provide, I won't. So that was replaced, he was replaced by a political appointee, someone who is not in the academy, and he is from Duke. He's a Duke graduate, which is just criminal. And anyway, but nevertheless, Chancellor Lee Roberts was appointed as an interim director. And then in April, the Board of Governors convened a rushed committee to vote to repeal the system-wide, we have 17 universities in our system, to repeal a system-wide policy that established diversity, equity, and inclusion offices and programs. So they voted to repeal that, and then there was going to be a vote on May 23rd. That already happened, but just giving you the context that we were. And then, of course, in late April, early May, there was the encampment in which, at the very first time in the history of our university, the police were called in to arrest and to break up an encampment of peaceful protesters. Any of you who've been in North Carolina, if you've ever been to, there's Chapel Hill and there's Carborough. The encampment was akin to a Saturday in Carborough. And if you're in North Carolina, you know what that means. And then in those the early morning of that Monday morning, just see police in riot gear to come to make those arrests. So there have been many body blows. That's one phrase that comes to us to our university. So how does that impact our center? One of the things that we've focused on, we create space, and what we're seeing as the phrase that I've used throughout my tenure, I'm in my 4th year as director, is we're a sure place on campus. Because we engage faculty from across campus, we're just seen as this place where this is what the university should look like. If we were stable, if we could just dream, if we could just do what academics do, to do our research and connect with other colleagues and think about big questions, and this is what we should be doing throughout the university. We certainly are doing it at the Institute for the Arts and Humanities. And so therefore, part of what we've done during these times is to create the space for faculty to convene. I happened to be in a meeting in a lunch meeting with 5 of my colleagues during the time of that shooting in August. I had convened, we had started regularly meeting. 6 or 7 of us that are women of color who run centers on campus, and we would meet monthly for lunch, and that was our Monday meeting on that day. So I also, and I'll just quickly wrap up here, I also am insistent on opening internal and external channels of communication for those faculty dialogues. We're either lead or we're major sponsors of many of the activities and lectures and so forth on campus and research initiatives. When we put our name on something, that means a lot. And so having our colleagues from the Center for Asian and Middle Eastern Studies have programming, when the college was so nervous about everything, putting our name on something meant something. So we're expected to lead and to be there for our colleagues. And I'll just say this. I also open dialogues with I have regular meetings with our external advisory board. And again, very powerful, and so we have those channels. I also developed a relationship with our interim chancellor, and when that decision was made to call the police on the students, he didn't talk to any faculty that I know of, and he certainly didn't talk to me. And so our colleagues in the Department of History started a petition. There had been many petitions, and I had not signed my name on any. I signed this one. And it was from the History Department putting in context that decision to call the police on our students and what that means for protest, the freedom of speech, academic freedom. It was about that, and I felt like I had to have my name there to defend that. And so then our chancellor, interim chancellor, because it was fraught, and so he reached out, and this was the email. I can tell this because it's public, because all of our emails are public now, apparently. But anyway, in the email, he said, there were about 12 of us on this email. I saw your names on this petition. Your names are the ones I recognized. I wish I recognized more. He'd only been there 5 months. I want to have a conversation. So he convened a group of people, and we were able to at least share with him what the fact that he needs to talk to faculty to know our culture and to know. And we made sure that people besides those 12 people were in the room. I did, and people who had been in the encampments, my colleagues who were faculty fellows who had been there. One woman who was there with her daughter. Not the night, it was a school night, thankfully. She wasn't there the Monday when the riot gear people came. But anyway, I'll end there. Just to say, opening dialogues, recognizing our stature and leaning into that responsibility to be there for our colleagues. Thank you. I went over.
That doesn't matter. That was wonderful. Okay, so it's a real honor to be asked to speak on this panel, and I want to thank all my colleagues on the board for an incredible conversation yesterday, which also helped, I think, all of us think about this. So we were asked to address a wide range of challenges that are currently being faced by the university, including public perceptions of higher education and questions surrounding academic freedom and the right to protest. And we were asked to do so specifically with respect to our roles as directors of humanities centers or other organizations. So the first thing I want to do is make an important distinction. There are many actions I have undertaken as an individual faculty member to express my views, in particular with respect to the war in Gaza. Faculty organizing and expression of views has been absolutely vital this year, especially with respect to the student protests and the chilling effect of the Palestine exception to free speech, as well as the conflation of criticism of Israeli policy with anti-Semitism, and the conflation of anti-war protests with anti-Semitism. Actions by faculty at Brown had a significant effect on the agreement reached by the university administration and the protesters to be able to present a case for divestment to the corporation, which they did this past weekend, and then move through a series of procedures that will culminate in a corporation vote on divestment in October. This does not mean Brown will divest, but it was a procedural and democratic resolution. it had a lot to do with faculty action and student action. However, I did not take any of my actions, nor did any of the other administrative leaders, chairs, and directors in the name of my center or institute. So anyone above center or institute typically never signs anything. And we're at this kind of interesting mid-level, but we all sign as individuals. But as Pat was making clear, there's a symbolic power to the fact that so many leaders are signing as faculty. But we were very, very careful about that, and I think it's different, there's so many different contexts, even though, you're not supposed to say that word if Elise Stefanik is anywhere near. But there are so many different contexts, but one thing I feel as a Humanities Center director is that I take very seriously the fact that I want to create a pluralistic space for the people that I represent actually and symbolically on campus. Since we are named for a whole division of the campus, even though, of course, we're not actually that division. By contrast, other work that I've done this year is very much done in the service of the Institute and the humanities more broadly. So as did Pat, we worked with other units to do the hard and serious work of bringing academic expertise to bear on the various crises we face, including not only the war in Gaza, but the environmental crisis and the growth of artificial intelligence, just to name a couple. So we, along with many units in the humanities and the social sciences, partnered with the Middle Eastern Studies program on teach-ins, public lectures, and we're in the process of planning a conference on the complex history of non-Zionist Jewish thought, a topos which has been entirely lost to view in the current discursive economy. So again, I also agree that co-sponsoring or partnering as a humanities center, as a big, and we're like a big institute and hub on campus, speaks volumes. And in fact, a lot of the advocacy-based programs, like I wouldn't say Middle Eastern is sort of between area studies and advocacy, but a lot of those programs come to us and they ask us explicitly to partner because they don't want the event to be seen as coming only from a marginal site on campus. And so I think there's a lot of work we can do to kind of partner on really important, serious academic humanities work. So I'm strongly committed to promoting deep inquiry, dialogue, and debate, and to advancing the work of the center as a pluralistic space which can house many different forms of intellectual commitment, many different forms of advocacy, different ideologies, and different individual and collaborative research programs. So given the threat to higher education and the way in which the humanities is often a special target in the larger culture wars playing out around higher ed, I mean, we really are the canary in the coal mine. Advocacy for the humanities and literary studies is the canary of the canary. It has been for a while. Okay. So given all of this, critique of humanities disinformation is critical. And that is something I think leaders of centers are well poised to take on. There are some extremely useful works of cultural analytics in the US and Europe, which dismantle some of the ways media representation functions to distort work in the humanities. One especially challenging aspect is that the prevalent discussion of the general humanities in US and European contexts plays into the problem, which is to say it's become its own kind of rhetorical thing, in contrast to the very, the saturation of the media landscape with specific humanities content, which is like never brought into the purview of all this, of the op-ed saying, the humanities taught me empathy, and then, the constant dispiriting drumbeat of decline of the humanities articles, which are about numbers of majors, financial prospects, and that's about it. And then you get what's called frame spillover, which is when an account of the decline of those two things, majors and financial prospects, then spills over into the content of the humanities, as though the humanities content is somehow not valuable, in decline, irrelevant. And that's profoundly wrong, okay? But there's some really interesting work on this in data science. And this is a challenge for us because our centers play into the general humanities problem, which is not, it's not only a problem, but I think we have to be really, really mindful of that. So I'm addressing these issues in lots of venues and ways and currently writing a long piece on it for a co-authored book with Simon During for the Oxford Literature and Politics series, since I think disinformation is a real issue. I was saying for a while that the humanities is being gaslighted, but I actually think you can say that and it kind of gets people, perks their ears up, but I do think it's really disinformation and it's really, really prevalent and you have to constantly fight that. Okay, lastly, to end on something a little more positive. Our institute just received funding for a Center of Environmental Humanities. I'm so lucky to be at a place like Brown. I just want to say we're fairly well-resourced, we're well-supported, I'm hyper-aware of this. So we just received funding for a Center of Environmental Humanities, which had been a thriving initiative and will now be led by the wonderful scholar of environmentalism and Latin America, Macarena Gomez-Baris. And we've just inaugurated a 3-year AI and the Humanities Lab, which is a collaborative lab that will be led by a computer scientist and an intellectual historian. I just want to also say that we are at a point, especially in the R1 institutions, where STEM scholars in AI and other fields are reaching out to and this is happening in environmental studies too, are reaching out to the humanities for collaboration. This is a positive development. Be welcoming. We're at a very different place than we were 10 years ago when we were asking to collaborate. We still are, but they are now really coming forward. The humanities is at the center of these two challenges and other crises, and I think we're poised to really strengthen our place on campus through collaboration, even as we continue to strongly support individual scholarship across the humanities and the humanistic social sciences. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to talk to you today about what's going on in the UK. And there are some differences, clear differences, but there are also some parallels too. The School of Advanced Study is a bit different to a humanities research centre based on campus. We're a national centre for the advancement of the arts and humanities across the UK. And most of what we do normally, Pat, is what you were talking about, the dream job. It's normally wonderful, and we get to promote fellowships. We run a national festival for arts and humanities research, Being Human. We provide essential resources, events right the way across the UK. We also are national advocates and provide national leadership, and that has come to dominate our last 12 months. And it's very appropriate that the theme of this conference is at risk, because that has dominated our last 12 months. We're made up of 8 research institutes representing all of the arts and humanities disciplines. And we advocate for our disciplines, but we come together collectively to advocate for the arts and humanities in UK national life and through our education system. And this year has been a profound challenge in which we found ourselves propelled to the front of a national debate about the place of arts and humanities in the UK. Much of the year has been dominated by supporting departments across the UK under threat of closure. And this has happened fast and at scale because of a fundamental funding crisis in UK institutions. Just to give you a sense of what we're talking about, since 2021, over 70 different higher education institutions across the UK are either closing humanities programs or significantly reducing arts and humanities provision. That is 43% of UK universities. So we are now looking, in a very short space of time, at a loss of national capacity. These cuts are being made simultaneously across the UK, with no one having any oversight over what will remain. And once it is gone, we will not be able to bring it back. We won't be able to build it again. And we're talking about a profound loss of national expertise in specialist skills right the way through to mainstream arts and humanities provision. We now have cold spots in the UK where individuals coming up to go to college will not have access to a creative or critical pathway into our universities. There will be no arts and humanities provision in those areas, and this is particularly important for students who, due to the cost of living crisis, go to university from home. So what is happening will not just affect our world position, but it will have real consequences for social mobility and passage into higher education. And I say this having woken up this morning to find a new policy announcement that seeks, ahead of our general election, to cut 1 in 8 university places. So this, yes, have a look at the BBC website. This is the challenge we face. Some disciplines are affected more than others. Modern languages is in free fall. And again, to give you a sense of the proportions of this, in 1998, there were 93 universities across the UK offering single and joint honours provision in modern languages. In 2019, there were 62. In 2024, there are 42. And by the end of the year, we expect to be 37 or lower. So we are launching, together with partners across the UK, a national campaign to save our national capacity in these creative and critical disciplines, running right the way through from schools, all the way through to advanced research before it's too late. And we have been on national media, we have been writing all of those op-eds, and we're getting some traction. And there's such a positive time to celebrate the humanities when you think about the profound difference that we have made as researchers and educators right the way across the world, in the UK, and it's coming at such a painful time because we now have the evidence to show the impact of our work, our research, and our practice. I'm so bowled over when I travel around the UK by the creativity, innovation and transformative nature of everything that we do. And so we will be fighting this right the way through. And it's wonderful to sort of hear that we have people right the way across the world with us in that fight.
Thank you, Pat, Amanda, and Joe. We have about 5 minutes, which doesn't seem, well, it just simply isn't adequate. But what we were going to ask is that if anyone wanted to respond to the prompt or engage our panelists, please come up to one of the mics at the front of the room. It's a little Quaker meeting room energy, like, you know, who's moved to speak? Well, the only reason we're sensitive to time is for the next panel, we have people zooming in from Germany. Okay. That's why we're mindful.
Hi all, thank you. Is it on? Thank you very much for your comments. I'm Kim Marshall from the University of Oklahoma Arts and Humanities Forum. I wonder if all of you or any of you who are going through some of the diversity, equity, and inclusion orders that are affecting large swaths of our nation, if you have any advice for the role of humanities centers in those sort of targeted areas and how it might affect our humanities faculty.
Thank you for that question. I'll try to be brief. We're making it up as we go along, only because I think that the people who are intent on repealing these policies and killing diversity, equity, and inclusion are creating this atmosphere of fear. And so it's almost like triage. I mean, I'm scheduled to talk to my colleague who's the chief diversity officer after the vote that happened on the 23rd, about, what we can do. I mean, they don't know if they're going to have jobs after July 1st, so we're waiting on that. So I would just say that right now, I'll just speak for myself. I don't know if this will be true of any other centers, but we are leaning into whatever power we have on campus, and my boldness to speak back. So when I get a missive from the dean via the provost that I have to change something, I ask him, where is it written down that I need to change this? Just give me the policy. I am a company woman. I'll follow your, but I'm not going to change things because you are afraid. And I say those words. So just speaking that, just asking for the policy, and also calling in, sort of speaking truth back to the disinformation, having a counter narrative is, I think, the best that we can do right now.
I mean, I would just say that at Brown, the response, well, first of all, the response to the Supreme Court decision on affirmative action has been dealt with mainly by the admissions folks. And the diversity, equity, and inclusion is, we're a private institution, and we have a very well-developed program that's been going since 2016, where each individual unit writes an annual report. And it's really great because every unit has been encouraged to focus on the ways in which, in their landscape context, they can help promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think we're just, and I'm sure this is true for many of you, I mean, given that we give out fellowships, we're just one of the most inclusive and diverse places on campus, and that gets kind of guaranteed just by the diversity of topics, rather than any demographic information, which we're not allowed to have anyway when we do fellowship selections.
Oh yeah, sure, Jennifer.
Okay, I'll try and make this quick. Jennifer Ho, University of Colorado Boulder. Would CHCI coming out with certain statements make a difference in terms of the work that you are each doing in your centers? In particular, I'm wondering if we individually as humanities, so I'm gonna just put out this because it's been on my mind. I've been thinking about how powerful it might be for my center to just say the word genocide, to actually just name what is going on as genocide, and to be able to point to other centers, or the CHCI as also just naming what the UN has named, which is that what is happening is genocide, whether that is both, there's a power in numbers, as well as a way to say, this is not just something that I as an individual is doing and saying, but like, I as a scholar am able to read reports and rely on experts, and we just need to be able to name the things that are clearly happening, and what is clearly happening is genocide.
Yeah. No, I'm with them. We had this discussion yesterday in the board meeting about a process, and a process that is sure to include all of the membership. So, it's the kind of thing that really needs to kind of come up through the membership if we're going to sort of take a position, whether in an open letter. I'm not even sure what form it would take. But yeah, I gave a talk, in my talk last night, I was talking about the shibboleths of this current moment, and arguably the word genocide is another one of those shibboleths. So I'm imagining that's going to be an interesting but difficult conversation within this membership. Time is up. Aaron with the save. Okay, so our next panel begins at 12:15. We're gonna, like I said, we're gonna try. I'm sorry, 11:15. Thank you, Amanda. I'm really just, another cup of coffee, please. We want to stay on time because we are going to have two panelists coming in remotely on Zoom. So thank our panelists for their contributions.